So, markets are good, except when they're not. Then we have problems. The government can often solve some of these problems, except then it makes more problems of its own. So what can we do?
For a while,
So this seems like a good time to talk about this. A lot of people are debating about the government these days. Debating? Ha! That seems generous. More like arguing, or protesting, or spewing absurd talking points repeated by racist pundits, or murdering protesters in the streets. Right. Okay, yeah. I mean, there's definitely a lot of that too, but even those of us who try to have a reasonable discussion, or point out factual errors, or the outright lies of this administration seem to have no effect. How can so many people be so immune to logic? No, I get that. I just mean that maybe now is a good time to have a reasonable discussion about the role of government. What good does it do to have a reasonable discussion with these people? They don't care about reason, or truth, or the proper role of government, that's for sure. The fascists have taken control. They've used the political system to gain power, and now they'll say whatever they have to say, and do whatever they have to do to keep that power. Okay, but I'm talking about the rest of us. Those of us who don't support the GOP politicians, or so-called news commentators, or influencers, or whatever. I'm looking at you, Tucker Carlson, Ben Shapiro, Mitch McConnell. You know what you are. They only live to serve the highest bidder. They couldn't give two shits about the people in this country, or what the government might or might not do to them, let alone for them. I know. But what about after this administration? Good luck. Okay, I admit, I am being a little bit optimistic. But let's just say that fascism doesn't win in the United States. I think we can all agree, all of us, I think most of us can agree that fascism isn't the type of government that we want. Well, those of us who know what the word means. Or any other type of authoritarian regime. You know, the type of government that controls people, that gets to control who gets power and who doesn't. Yep. But let's just say, for the sake of the argument, that enough people who still believe in democracy in America vote in November, and that there is a peaceful transition of power. Let's assume that the fascists don't have enough support from the military and police to keep their power by force, and we already know they don't care about the law or the Constitution, and so far, they've been able to get away with literally anything they want. Right. But let's just say that by some miracle we get through all of this. The question still remains, for the rest of us, what do we want the government to look like? How much power should that government have? The American colonists were keenly aware of how much it sucks to have a king with too much power.
Cause when push comes to shove, I will kill your friends and family to remind you of my love. Da 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 da.
So we want a government as little like a king as possible. The less power that we give to the government, the better, right?
yes.
Well, the Articles of Confederation was the first U.S. Constitution, and it leaned way into states' rights, like no central power whatsoever. So much so that the federal Congress had no money, no way to raise money, and thousands of farmer soldiers looking to get paid for their service in the war. Now, when these farmers took up their arms against the federal government, they had no way to raise an army of their own in defense. So this first pass attempt at the U.S. government was impotent.
Like erectile dysfunction, ED.
The country was falling apart after just a couple years. Not a good look. So we do need some sort of central power to the government in order to hold the Union together. Now, in America, we have another power that is said to keep things organized in society. You mean, other than passive aggression and social shaming? Economists and economists adjacent refer to this as free market capitalism, or the invisible hand, or sometimes just the market. Anyone who has taken Economics 101 probably knows at least one thing. Maybe three things. Supply, demand, and the power of the free market. And I'll be honest, a perfectly competitive market with an infinite distribution of both consumers and producers, with continuous and at least somewhat elastic preferences, tends to be really good at distributing resources efficiently. Who makes what and how much depends on how badly people want it. The market creates naturally incentives to fulfill needs. It's awesome. And for most business students and future politicians, that's all they need to know. That's all they want to know. But, and I'm sure most economics instructors know this and teach this, and are equally as distressed as I am that it doesn't seem to sink in better. But in real life, Most markets are not perfect. Any good economics course is going to spend at least as much time teaching you about the failures and limitations of the free market as they do extolling the power of prices and incentives. Some common market failures include monopolies, externalities, and public goods. Monopoly is what we call it when one person or company owns an entire industry. They are then able to raise their prices without worrying about another company offering a competing price and stealing their customers. Think of the internet provider in your neighborhood, or Windows 10, or your little brother owning all of the railroads. Externalities are when some choice has some sort of side effects to people other than the choice chooser. Farting in public, for example, smells way worse to the people around you than it does to you. That's a negative externality. And public goods are things that everyone can benefit from, even if only one person pays for it. Things like a fire department or a water treatment plant. As long as these things exist in a neighborhood, everybody can benefit. Now, these are just a few examples, and there are plenty of other situations in which the free market will always fail to produce the most efficient outcomes. But even if the markets are perfect, there's still the issue that most economic models don't care one bit about things like inequality or inelastic demand. The one main metric for whether a market works, in a basic intro to econ way, is that the pie of available resources is made to be as big as possible. Which, by itself, more pie is definitely a good thing. But what if that entire pie was just going to one guy, and he eats half of it and throws the rest of it away? Wouldn't we all be a little bit happier if more people got more of that pie? Well, I can think of one guy who might not like it. Wouldn't you be happier if you got a slice? We can argue about whether it's good for everyone to get an equal slice, or how we tell who is most deserving of pie or whatever. But surely we can agree that things will be better if there's some distribution of pie as the pie gets bigger. Well, basic economic theory doesn't say much about that. Or if people need certain medical supplies or equipment in order to survive, they're going to be willing to spend all that they have in order to get it. And that's the market-efficient outcome. But maybe we as a society think that that just kind of sucks, and maybe we'd like something to be a little bit different. Well, now we're making a case for government. Many business people and politicians, who were probably required to take Econ 101 in college, though apparently they didn't pay that close attention, believe that the free market, will solve all of our problems. But Econ 101 has also given us some pretty efficient government solutions to common market failures. Often, utilities like electricity, or water, or internet access lead to what are called natural monopolies, because it doesn't make a lot of sense for competing firms to lay power lines or pipe right next to each other. In these cases, it's common for city governments to own these utilities. And this works better because the government can be mandated to charge a lower price than a firm would looking to maximize profits. This leads to a more efficient outcome. And remember, efficient equals bigger pie, so win-win. If markets encourage people to do too much of something, like polluting the water or emitting carbon dioxide that has negative externalities on other people, then the government can tax these polluters into polluting less. When things cost more, people tend to do less of it. Similarly, if the market encourages too little of something, the government can pay people to get vaccinated, for example. Public goods, like the fire department or the post office, which everyone can benefit from no matter who pays, are often underproduced by the market. So, in order to support a more robust society, the government can make everyone better off by producing these services itself. So, the government can make things more efficient when markets fail, which again is all the time. This is not a rare occurrence. And even if the markets are perfect, which again, very often, they're not, the government still needs some power to make sure that the markets work at all, by granting and maintaining clear property rights or enforcing contracts. But of course, as any economist will tell you, there are no free lunches. Everything comes at a cost, somewhere to someone, eventually. And as many of you have been trying to tell me, I'm sure, for the past few minutes, government intervention is not costless. Well, lucky for you folks, I'm not only an economist and a behavioral scientist.
What?
But I'm also a master of public policy analysis, if the degree on my wall is to be believed.
Forgive me, Master.
Oh man, that gets me every time. Some of the costs of relying on the government to try and fix things include imperfect information. Even the most altruistic government can't always know which policies will lead to what outcomes. We rely on analysts, hopefully, to do research and come up with the best estimations that we can, but we can never know everything. And of course, politicians and bureaucrats are rarely the most altruistic people. There is always a potential for corruption, or bribery, or people seeking power for power's sake rather than the good of the people. And the more power that is consolidated into one place or office, the more attractive that office will be to corrupt persons or organizations. Administrative costs. I'm sure we're all familiar with the stereotype of bureaucratic red tape and efficiency loss due to public intervention. I know plenty of people in my hometown are super familiar with this one. And then we have the problem of what is called localized benefits and distributed costs. This is typically what you might know as the major downside of private interest groups lobbying public policy. Imagine a policy that takes 5 cents from everyone in the country and gives it to just one guy. This guy stands to gain millions of dollars. He has a lot to fight for, and potentially a lot of resources to fight with. On the other hand, it might be hard for one person to get too upset about losing a nickel, if they're even aware of it. Many policies are like this. When the costs are distributed among many people, they may seem small, and it requires a lot of information and organization in order to fight against it. This is one reason why unions are so valuable. And voting issues. Arguably, a government will serve the people better if the people are better represented. The American colonists knew that. But who is represented by the government? How much? Who isn't represented? Several issues can make the idea of just representation dubious, and maybe we can talk about these more in another video. So, markets are good, except when they're not. Then we have problems. The government can often solve some of these problems, except then it makes more problems of its own. So, what can we do? Well, if you're looking for a neat, perfect little solution to all of our problems, you may be living on the wrong planet. Or the wrong reality. The fact is that every choice we make has costs and benefits. There are always upsides and downsides. The secret to making the right choice can never be about finding the perfect solution. We always have to weigh the costs of each of our potential solutions against the cost of doing nothing. Ooh, that sounds like a lot of work. Maybe, but that doesn't make it wrong. One extreme approach to this cost-benefit example of government policy is described by prominent libertarian and magician's assistant to teller, Penn Jillete.
Our government has a monopoly on force. Have a monopoly on force. The government is the only organization that is supposed to be able to use force. The governments are the only ones that are allowed to use guns to hurt another person or threaten another person legally. So the question becomes, what would I use a gun to do? Would I use a gun to stop someone from being killed? Yes. Would I use a gun to stop someone from being raped? Yes. Would I use a gun to build a library? Would I take money from someone to build a library? Well, I'd certainly give my money. I'd certainly work. I'd certainly beg you for money to build a library. Libraries really matter to me. I was born in ¡55. I'm from a small town. Without a library, I would have known nothing. I had to ride my bike to the library to learn about Lenny Bruce, Franz Kafka. I got Stravinsky records from the library. It meant everything to me. Libraries matter, but that's the libertarian question. Now, taking care of people? Would you use a gun to take care of others? That's a hard one. Because taxation is using violence. Now, people try to say taxation is voluntary. It's not. If you don't pay your taxes, eventually, somewhere down the line, someone with a gun will show up. They just will. At some point, if you don't do that. What do we do with our taxes? Would we use a gun to defend our country? Yeah, I guess we got it, right? But we use a gun for everything we use for taxes. So when I see the government doing something, I ask myself, would I use a gun to do that?
Damn, what a great starting point. I fundamentally believe that any discussion of government policy that doesn't acknowledge what Mr. Jillete just said is guilty of a massive oversight. Wait a minute. Didn't you vote for Bernie Sanders? Well, I caucused for Bernie in 2016, and I primaried for him in 2020, yeah. Well, what about all that small government stuff you just said? Are you a socialist or a libertarian? Make up your mind. Maybe I'm a social libertarian. The point is that, sucks as it may, the best solution sometimes will be to do nothing, because any fix that we can come up with will necessarily make things worse. But other times, the government costs will be worth trying to alleviate the problem. I think a lot of discussion breaks down because either one side or the other will either say that there are no costs, or that the costs are so high that we should never do anything. So when you see me promoting progressive policies on social media or whatever, I'm not coming at this as some sort of socialist ideologue. It just turns out that many of the social programs being debated right now are, according to my calculations, easily worth the cost of government intervention. Many of the progressive policies being debated today are really just about the redistribution of funds that already exist. We want more money to be directed toward education and childcare, and less money to be directed toward police and prisons and wars that only work to influence the price of oil. We want, instead, more money spent on healthcare and things like that. These are the types of things that have positive spillover effects on society. Crime goes down when more people don't have to worry about meeting their basic necessities. Crime goes down when fewer dads are in prison. Society is better for everyone when more people have more education. And workers are more productive when they're not starving, or don't have to worry about childcare, and are not being shot in the streets. The current status quo, and policies for the past 30 years or so have been making this worse, is that the rich and powerful in the United States are getting more rich and more powerful. Our tax and finance laws incentivize companies to prioritize growth and acquisition over stability and worker compensation. We're so afraid of messing up the free market that we haven't broken up monopolies in decades. We're so obsessed with profits in the stock market that we're afraid to regulate externalities. Due to our collective misunderstanding of basic economics, either willing or not, we've allowed the capital owners in our country to hoard more and more wealth at the expense of the economy as a whole. These are known market failures that we're allowing to continue, and thus stopping the pie from being as big as it could be. And it's already massive. In 2018, the US collectively held $113 trillion of wealth. That's over $300,000 per person, including children. The US economy then produces over $20 trillion of new goods and services every year, and the federal budget is worth $2 to $3 trillion annually. That's a lot of money. Meanwhile, 40% of Americans are living at or below poverty level, meaning they're scraping together everything that they can just to afford food and shelter and clothing. Every year, the government takes more money from the people and gives it to the corporations. We are so far in the wrong direction that even if the efficiency costs of fixing these problems were huge, we'd still be just fine. And these policies can be pursued without really increasing the government budget or consolidating any power. It's about putting money back into the programs that have been gutted by A, raising taxes back to where they used to be. The government was fine back then, by the way. And B, shrinking the bloated programs that have replaced the more useful ones. And if you're worried about administrative burden, why not consider a universal basic income instead of a full menu of social programs? Like I said, we can definitely afford it. And maybe the government isn't the best organization to fix these problems. Maybe an entrepreneuring activist can address some of these needs with the right nonprofit organization. A case can be made for that. But the first thing we got to do is stop the fascists. Right. And I think there's one thing we can all agree on. Liberal, conservative, socialist, libertarian. So, everyone but the fascists. After we stop this terror train from taking over the rest of the country, we need to, have to, must, rein back the power that we've allowed Congress to give to the presidency. Our government was founded on the idea that centralized power is bad. It should be hard to get things done. I mean, not like Mitch McConnell hard. That's ridiculous. Right. So maybe we campaign to limit the power of the filibuster, for starters. But we definitely cannot allow temporary, short-term expediency to allow us to consolidate more power into one place. Again, all the problems that come from government solutions are made worse the more power is consolidated into one place. And now we've all seen firsthand what a corrupt man can do to a good country with too much power. And history has shown us again and again that the most corrupt among us are going to do whatever they can to get more power. So the first thing we need to do, after stopping Trump and his fascist sycophants, is to immediately strip away as much power as we can from the presidency. It needs to be much less attractive to the next Trump. But then we also need to limit the power of Congress members to keep getting rich at our expense. We need to limit campaign contributions and gerrymandering, and consider term limits, for example. These politicians, of course, are not going to give up their power willingly, so we need to vote for candidates that will. Then, we can focus on solutions that will truly make this country a better place. And recognizing the potential pitfalls of government intervention, there are certain policies that we can support that will help to mitigate these problems. Things like supporting workers' unions, and making it easier rather than harder for people to vote. Hopefully, we continue to elect more people, and this has to happen at local, state, and the national level, who are willing to think very carefully about the types of policies that we pursue, and take seriously the costs of government intervention. It starts with us. It starts with you. Thanks for listening to my political rant about costs and benefits. It's been very hopeful to see how the past couple of years have encouraged many of you to be a little bit more careful and more informed about these sorts of things. And I look forward to talking with you more about it. Anytime. And we haven't even mentioned how the racists are using the free market to stay in power. That's okay, man. We'll get it next time.